Greetings, home artists. My name is Diane Pebley, and this is the Delightful Light YouTube channel. Today I'd like to show you how to make a drawstring bag that would be great to donate to first responders in our local area. They're called victims advocates. These first responders carry these drawstring bags in the trunks of their vehicles, so they have them with them when they have to take children out of their homes for some reason or another. And the children tend to feel more secure when they can take their own personal possessions with them. So these drawstring bags give those children the opportunity to do that. But I have to warn you, I'm not one for following directions, so we're going to just toss those out and make a design that I think is a whole lot easier to do. So check out the description for a list of the materials and the tools that you're going to need, and keep watching. Okay, I wanted to show you why I did not want to follow the directions. This first duffel bag that I have here on top of my stack, I followed the directions with, and it required that I put a rolled hem right here, right next to where all the action is taking place with the drawstrings. If you make a rolled hem, you know that there's 3 layers of fabric here. Then if you fold it again, that makes another 3 layers here because it's obviously folded there, so 3 and 3, that's 6 layers. Then you have another side, that's 12 layers of fabric right here where all the action takes place. That's fine for thin fabrics like this one. If you're using ripstop nylon to make this pattern, all you really need to do is do what I did on this next one, which is fold the fabric back to the inside and then sew the seam. So for fabrics that do not fray, that's really all you need to do on this end. But I thought I could do this a little bit better and make this area far more secure for woven fabrics that are really thick, like duck cloth. Well, this is actually not duck cloth, but it's pretty close. And I came up with a different technique that does not involve folding something in and having a raw edge on the inside that's exposed and that can fray while the threads are moving, or while the drawstrings are moving back and forth. So I'm going to show you this method, and I want to let you know that it does take a little bit more fabric at the top of the duffel bag than the original pattern does. The reason is because I've had to make this distance from the fold to my thumb right here. I've had to lengthen that distance a bit in order to allow the drawstrings to flow freely and close the bag more completely. Okay, that edge is trued. Okay, now this other end of the fabric, as you can tell, is not cut straight. I mean, we've got this overlap right here, so this needs to be straightened up. Didn't go all the way through. Right down here. There we go. Okay, the drawstrings run this way, and in order to have drawstrings opening on this side, we need to cut this fold open. So, I'm right-handed, so we're going to start right here. All I'm doing is inserting my scissors, holding down the fabric, putting tension on the fabric, and making a cut. There. Okay, now let's show you how to remove the selvages, because we don't want this white edge and we don't want that fuzzy stuff showing through when we sew this right sides together. So I am going to fold this in half like so, and this is the edge I want to cut, so I'm going to have that vertical to me right there. The next fold is right here, so I'm going to make sure these dotted lines on the ruler are placed right on the fold. It looks good. I'm just going to zip. There we go. That gives us 2 pieces. It's exactly the same size.
Now press the hem down to the wrong sides. This will make a couple of other steps a lot easier later on in the project. The width of this hem depends on 2 things: how thick and tightly woven your chosen fabric is, and how thick the drawstring cords are. I'm using a medium weight, loosely woven duck cloth fabric from Hobby Lobby, so my hem is pressed down 2.5 inches. Denims or corduroys that are thick and tightly woven need about 3 to 4 inch hems. Finish the raw edge of only the pressed hem. Finishing refers to preventing woven fabrics from fraying by securing the raw edge to itself. This is done on a sewing machine with a wide and long zigzag stitch and an overcast sewing foot. It can also be done on a serger, which is what I'm doing, and you can use either a 3 or 4 thread overlock stitch. The finished edge will be used later as a guide, so it needs to be straight and neat. Now you're ready to fold the hem back at the pressed crease with right sides together.
This is 2.5 inches from there to there. It's a little bit long, so I'm going to just scrape it so it goes into place. Scrape it with my fingernail. And that's it. That's 2.5 inches. And again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to back up into this one. So, and I'm going to back up right to 1 more stitch, about right there. Measure, I can go 1 more stitch backwards. There. Yep, that's 1/2 inch. So now I can go forward, 1/2 inch seam allowance, all the way off, and backwards. Okay, now that we have sewn this seam on all 4 ends of the casing, 2 on each of the pieces of our fabric, we want to serge all the way around the 3 remaining sides of each piece, catching this seam so that it lays flat just like it does right here. Okay, you can see for both pieces, my front and, if you want to call it, the back, have been serged now on all 4 sides, and I have made sure to catch this seam in the serging so it's held down just like that is. And I've done that all the way around both pieces. Now it's time to turn this right side out. And we want to form a really nice 90-degree point right there where this seam is. The way we do that is we stick our thumb or our finger, I've got my index finger right there, all the way up into that corner right there. Then we fold down. See that? I folded the seam allowance on top of that seam so that the seam is right there in the crease. Now keep your thumb and your index finger tight together to hold that seam allowance in place, and then just wrap it around. And what happens is, there we go, it has finished moving. We've got a nice 90-degree point, and all we did was turn it. We did not have to pick anything. We accomplished that because we held the seam allowance in place where it needed to be while we turned it. Okay, we have one piece here that has not been turned right side out, we have one piece that has been turned right side out, and we are going to stuff this one inside of this one all the way inside into the corner, nice and tight. Just stuff it in there. And the reason we want to do that is because now we can see that these two edges are getting really close to being lined up, and those two edges are getting really close to being lined up. Now we want to open this up like that in order to form this 90-degree angle right here, so that we can get our sewing foot inside this space in order to sew this seam right here. So you can tell we need to line those up right there. I need to line them up all the way so we've got a nice tight connection right there. I'll stick a pin in right there. And now we want to also line these edges up. So these are lined up. Now these edges need to be lined up. Just like that. And stick a pin in there. Opposite direction. So we got 2 pins in there. Okay, now okay, there we go. And now, oh, too close, scoot that up. Alright, needle has gone down 1 stitch length in front of that seam. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but the edge right here is located at the edge of my foot, which is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now we can take our pins out because our needle is down, holding everything in place. And now we're going to sew just enough just to get the seam started. Grab a hold of my thread, hold it taut, and sew 3 stitches forward, 1, 2, 3. And now 3 stitches backwards. I don't know if you can see that. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we are ready to sew forward. But before we sew forward, we're going to set this up so that we make sure that our corners are lined up right here. This is the first corner we're going to get to when we sew down this seam right here. Now I'm going to hold this corner right here. It's been pinned. I'm going to hold it right here, and then I'm going to stick my hand in between both layers and fold it in half and line up the seams, or line up the edges at the halfway point. Okay, there we go. The reason I'm doing that, here's the halfway point. Line up the edges and stick a pin in there. The reason I'm doing that is because when I get to when I'm sewing down this seam and I arrive at this pin, I can check to see if my fabric layers are slipping at all. And I'll show that to you when I get down there. Okay, I'm ready to go. I've got this first halfway point pin in my right hand, and I'm going to lay out my edges so that they all line up. And now I'm going to do some proper taut sewing, but I don't really have a lot to hold on to back here for proper taut sewing, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of forward sewing. Now I can hold on to it. Okay, but that's too much, so I'll grab it right there. Alrighty, oops, they're slipping right there, I can tell you. Got it lined up. Okay, those are all lined up. Taut sewing. Slip stopped again. Okay, the way you tell if your fabric is actually slipping in a manner that you don't want it to is you compare both layers of fabric right there. Okay, if they are the same length from the needle to the pin, they have not slipped. If they are not the same length, they would have, one layer would have a little bit of a wrinkle in it, either the top layer or the bottom layer. But these are lined up straight, they're the same length, they're still together, so we know that nothing has slipped. So, take this a little further, take the pin out, and I can do the same check all the way down here. Line them up. There we go, taut sewing. And taut sewing is the process of making sure that everything is taut as it goes underneath the sewing foot. Taut is not tight. Tight would form wrinkles, and I'm going to pull on this so you can see the wrinkles. See those wrinkles form right there? Oops, let me let go and show it again. Pulling the thread and those wrinkles formed right over there on both sides of where I'm pulling. There's wrinkles forming. That is too tight. You do not want that to happen. What you want it to happen is just you hold on to it and it just lays flat without any wrinkles in it. And that's taut. Okay, now a lot of you have been taught that when you approach a corner like this, you just sew off the end. I wasn't taught that way. I was taught to pivot about 1/2 inch away from this edge and 1/2 inch away from this edge. And that's what I'm going to do. So we're going to go until it's 1/2 inch away from this edge. And perfect, 1/2 inch. Okay, lift it up, turn the corner. Get this line back up again. Now again, I don't have a lot to hold on to back here, so I'm going to just sew it a little ways. Okay, now I've got something to line or to hold on to back there. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up these corners right there and put a pin in it. Now again, I'm going to line up those edges, fold it in half like that. So at the halfway point, I can test to see if my edges are lined up. Ouch, just stuck myself. Okay, there we go. Now I can hold on and do taut sewing. And again, there are no wrinkles in either layer as I approached this pin right here, so I know that it's lined up properly and there's no stretching or slipping going on between the layers. Okay, there we go, taut, and go. Take the pin out. You can see the layers are still lined up there, and again we're going to stop 1/2 inch away from this edge. And one more stitch. Yep, perfect. Lift presser foot and turn. Now on this end, we want to definitely make sure that this end lines up. Because if it doesn't, we're going to be in trouble. So what we're going to do is we're going to stuff again. Remember the one that's turned right side out gets stuffed inside the one that does not get, or that is not turned right side out, and just stuff it in there as far as you can get it. and that lines up both of those layers right here, or both of those edges right there. And now we're going to tug on it like so in order to get the seams in the right place. Just tugging on it. You can feel this to get when those seams are on top of each other, you can feel it inside there. Okay, and now a pin to hold that in place. And again, we need to line up this edge so that we have our 90-degree corner right there. So just pull those seam allowances on top of each other. And then line those up like that. And then that 90 degree, once that 90 degree is perfectly aligned up and formed, we know we're ready to go. Let's stick a pin in there to hold that in place. Now, once again, we can line this up on the edges, fold it in half to get to the halfway point. There, that's the halfway point. And put a pin in right there. And now we're ready to sew this third side. There we go. And sew a little glaze. Okay, now I've got something I can hold on to, and here we go. Okay, here's the pin. I've got my hand on the pin, aligning these edges up. Closer. And now we can keep going. Here comes the pin, and look, there is absolutely no wrinkles in here. They are, both layers are the same length. You can see this kind of looks like it might be, but in actuality it's just the seam allowance wanting to turn the other way. So they really are the same length, and so there's no slipping going on between layers. Cool. Halfway there. Okay, do the same thing. Okay, seam allowances are nestled wrong. Here we go, like that. Edges are lined up. Now I can grab the back side and do some top sewing. There we go. Slipped aside. Okay, so here we go. Now remember, we've got this piece stuffed inside of this one, so we need to sew into that this direction, but we can't unless we open this up and lay those seam allowances flat on top of each other like that. And again, that's what's forming our 90 degrees in that corner right there. So we're going to take this a little slower. I'm just going to have to hold it because your sewing foot needs to go in there. Take that pin out. And what we're looking for, remember we started this seam. We started this seam, that's what we just sewed. We started at 1 stitch length away from this seam, and we want to end 1 stitch length away from the seam on this side. except it's dark green thread on black fabric over here, so it's not going to be very visible on camera. I'm sorry about that. So I've got about a 3/4 of an inch to go. I'll just take that pin out. I'm going to go slow so I can make sure I stop in the right place. Oh, one more stitch. There we go. And backwards to secure. Cut. And we're done.
Align the pressed crease from step 6 even with the finished raw edge from step 5. Use any available motifs in the fabric to keep the folds straight, or use a pressing gauge to measure it. First, align and pin the openings at each end so all the corners lay flat. Add additional pins at every halfway point between 2 pins until the casing has been pinned into 8 sections.
The reason we're lining the guide here up with 1 1/8 and not 1 1/4 is because we're sewing from the top and not from the bottom. So we're going to put the fabric down and actually sew on the top side. And we're going to use a zigzag stitch. And we're going to start right here, right over the top of this seam. If I can, there we go. And now I can just hold that down, get a starter stitch. I'm holding the thread down, by the way. Holding the thread down. Oh, you can't see that. Hold the thread down so that it does not knot when it takes off. Okay, now I've got a couple of stitches down. I've got my needle down. And I'm going to reach in and pull the pin out. Okay, I've got the next needle, or the next pin is right there. You can see it there on the bottom side. I'm placing the edge of the fold right there. Everything's flat right here. So now I'm going to grab the back and we're going to do a bit of taut sewing. Up, my finger got close to, so there's one pin coming out, and that's an end right there. We've got another one coming. Oops, we've got to be really careful right here. Okay, I think I'll switch to my stiletto. I'm just going to go slow. Let it go up that hump, cross that seam, and put the needle down. And now I'm going to have to lift the presser foot up to get to that pin. There we go. And that's the seam on the other side from where we started. We're halfway around. Okay.
Press your foot down. Here we go again. Taut sewing. Here we go again. Away we go. Here we go.
Now we're going to go nice and slow. Hold this down with the stiletto. Right on top of where we were before, and I am going to put the needle up, change to a satin stitch. That should be good. Now I'm going to go backwards. Oops, you can't see that. And the reason I'm doing this satin stitch backwards is because I only want one layer there. There we go. And now I can cut it. And now look, we've got that reinforcement right there over the top of this V. Yay!
Attach a safety pin to a bodkin, then attach the end of one cord to the safety pin. Insert the bodkin into the casing and gather the fabric onto the bodkin with one hand, pulling the fabric off the bodkin with the other hand to carry the cord all the way around the entire bag. Tie a knot in the drawstring so they won't pull out of the casing accidentally. Start at the other opening and do the same thing with the second cord.
So what do you think? I'm willing to bet you've got a lot more experience making this drawstring bag. In fact, I bet if you change up the weight of the fabric, use thinner fabric, thicker fabric with the same pattern, you'll gain even more experience knowing how the different fabrics affect the pattern itself. And you'll be able to help more children in your community. So join us next time for a little bit more of a challenging project. Ta-ta!